Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, the UAW calls a strike at selected Ford, GM, and Stellantis auto plants, wanting a 40% wage increase and a 4-day work week. So, will they get it? And what gets cyber hacked in Vegas, well, apparently doesn't stay in Vegas. 2 casino giants gets hacked for millions of dollars in a cyber ransom of clients' data. Are you enjoying that elite status for the airport lounge while you're waiting for your flight? Well, one airline is now saying you'll have to start paying more to keep it. August CPI inflation numbers are released, and if you think you're paying more in August for what you bought in July, you're not imagining anything. Gasoline prices are shooting up with Saudi Arabia withholding oil exports. And how will this affect inflation? Tonight, we're going to be talking with the chief economist at Wells Fargo Bank, Jay Bryson, about inflation and how will the UAW strike and labor unions affect the economy. And don't forget, a possible government shutdown in a couple of weeks. So what will that have on the country? We'll talk to Jay about that tonight. I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories and more. It's Friday, and it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. It's Friday, September the 15th. Well, as of midnight this morning, the UAW called a strike on the big 3 automakers with about 13,000 workers hitting the picket lines. The union is demanding a 40% wage increase over 4 years, getting paid for 5 days but working for 4 days, increasing their retirement pay as well as other demands. GM and Ford are offering 20% increases, with Stellantis slightly less, plus benefits as health care and retirement. Ford CEO Jim Farley said that if Ford pays what the UAW is demanding, which is a 40% wage and benefit increase, according to Farley, Ford would have lost $15 billion and gone bankrupt by now. And also, according to Farley, the average pay for the factory worker would be nearly $300,000 a year for a 4-day work week per employee. Well, from last month, inflation rose higher than expected, up 0.6%, and core CPI, which excludes volatile areas as food and energy, that rose 0.3%. And for year-over-year CPI, inflation from last August is now up 3.7%. That was down from the highest during the summer of last year. But still, it's growing just the same. Shelter or rent rose the fastest at almost 8%, and food is just under 4.5%. And with the possibility of oil getting to $100 per barrel, gasoline rose this week as gas in California is now averaging $5.60 per gallon. Well, how did our money do this week? The Dow Jones ended positive for the week, with the top sectors were utilities, discretionary, and financials. And the S&P and the NASDAQ both ended negative for the week. This week, the Dow Jones closed up just over 0.1% for the week. And the S&P 500, they closed down 0.4% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they closed down this week, down 0.3% for the week. And next week, the Federal Reserve is going to have their September meeting to decide whether to raise interest rates higher or keep them as they are. So why is this so important? Well, as of August, with interest rates, the housing market is slowing because of a 30-year mortgage, and it's now just over 7%, where 1 year ago it was at 5.5%. And with the auto strike starting today, used cars will become more popular, and today financing a used vehicle, it's going to cost you over 15.5%. Credit card interest is now just over 24% on unpaid charges. And the Census Bureau released an audit that found that Americans are going backward in median home income. The survey found that Asian families fared the best with an annual median income of just over $108,000 annual, while white households declined by 3.6% from 2021, and Black and Hispanic households, they held the same from the previous year. Today, The median household income is now at $74,500 annually. But notice, just 3 years ago, it was higher at just over $78,000. That means the last 3 years, the average median family has lost just under $4,000 in household income. California is passing a $20 per hour minimum wage for fast food workers. Now, I guess those Happy Meals will be making consumers in California a lot less happy. So what will this increasing inflation but decreasing annual household income have on the economy, on labor, and add to that, and will the Federal Reserve raise interest rates even higher next week? Tonight, to answer these questions and more, we've got Wells Fargo's chief economist and managing director, Jay Bryson. Hi, Jay. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Well, thanks for having me, Andre. Pleasure to be here.
The Federal Reserve has 3 more meetings for the rest of this year. We've got one in September, we've got one November and December. I think you're on record as saying that you don't think they're going to be raising rates any more times throughout the rest of this year. But what I don't remember was that before the August job numbers that came out a couple of weeks ago or after? Now that August came out, August numbers are out, do you still think that they're not going to be raising rates anymore?
Yeah, that's right, Andre. And actually, we've been in the camp for a while now that we thought that the peak in the Fed funds rate is probably behind us. They do have a meeting on September the 20th. It's very unlikely, it seems at this point, that they're going to raise rates. The market certainly is not priced for that. Potentially, you could see them maybe going at their next meeting on November the 1st. It really is going to depend upon the upcoming data between now and then. Certainly, inflation is coming down. It's not back down to the Fed's 2% target yet, but they've raised rates 525 basis points since last spring. Monetary policy works with a lag. We are seeing signs that the economy is slowing somewhat, and I think there's a number of people there who don't want to put the economy into recession.
Well, next year is a presidential election, 2024. Do you think politically it wouldn't be wise for them that they won't be raising rates next year either?
So, if you go back and you look at history, the Fed generally is always raising or cutting rates in a presidential election year. It's not like they have to sit out the entire year. Now, would they rather be not changing policy in the few weeks before an election? Yeah. They don't want to be seen as being partisan one way or the other. But the Fed will do what the Fed needs to do. And, again, if you go back and you look at any presidential election year, with the exception of 2012, and the economy was still working through the hangover of the financial crisis, didn't raise rates that year. But it wasn't like it was because of the 2012 presidential election. It was because, the economy was still working through the hangover of the great financial crisis.
Well, Wall Street is expecting corporate earnings to be up for third quarter and fourth quarter and for the foreseeable future after rebounding from earlier this year. If corporate earnings are up, and the economy is starting to hum, which is in theory good, but that also is not really what the Federal Reserve wants. Do you think that will affect their decision with, as you were talking about, the data that they'll be looking at?
Yeah, so if the economy continues to hum, to use your word, if the economy, if the data continue to come in strong, we'll see an extended pause here for them to see what's happening with the economy. But if the economy continues to hum, if corporate earnings remain strong, that shows that the underlying economy is still strong. Then you could potentially see the Fed going higher. And quite frankly, markets are not priced for that right now. The financial market is not priced for more rate hikes.
Well, just last week, the Biden administration canceled oil drilling that the last administration, the Trump administration, had started. And it was at the same time they were doing that, Saudi Arabia said that they were going to extend the oil moratorium until at least the end of this year, and if not longer. So I'm wondering, with oil prices, some analysts are saying that it might get to $100 a barrel. But with that, and with UAW, the United Auto Workers, striking in Michigan, and other things, do you think that would also slow down the economy?
So, so let's go to the second one first. Talk about the UAW. So, yes, if you have a major strike that lasts for a long period of time, that could have a slowing effect on the economy. But let's put things into perspective. As a percent of total value add, roughly there's about 1 million people who are employed in the automotive industry, and that would include auto parts as well. Total payroll employment is about 156 million. So we're talking 1 million out of 156. It's relatively, kind of small potatoes. If you broaden it out and you say, how big is unions today? I think about 6% of the labor force is unionized. So, the point here, it's a relatively modest sort of effect. If oil prices were to go up to $100 a barrel, what sort of effect does that have on the economy? Again, if you look at, say, the CPI, about 6% of what we spend on, what consumers spend is energy. And that's not only just oil, that would include natural gas, it would include all sorts of forms of energy as well. It gets a lot of attention because consumers see gas prices all the time. Every time they go out and fill up their car, they see it. It's a relatively small part of the economy. But, it could be, if you have a number of these sorts of things, oil prices going up, you have the student loan, students are going to start paying back loans starting in October. You have, relatively tight monetary policy. All these things in and of themselves is not enough to put the economy into recession. But if you take 2, 3, 4 of these things on top of each other, one of those could be the straw that potentially breaks the camel's back.
With the UAW and striking, what do you think this would do to the state, specifically of Michigan?
Yeah, well, it's not only Michigan, right? I mean, it would be other parts of the country as well. Now, if you look at a lot of southern states, right? If you look at Alabama, Mississippi, those workforces tend not to be unionized. But, in terms of Michigan, it's obviously it's a bigger part of their overall economy. If you go on strike there, that's going to have a much larger effect on the overall Michigan sort of economy. But, Michigan is, and it'd be broader than just Michigan. It'd be, Indiana, perhaps Illinois, maybe some parts of Wisconsin as well, where, you do have unionized labor markets up there. So it certainly have a slowing effect on those folks. But in terms of the overall, U.S. economy, again, a strike in the auto industry would not be enough to put you into a recession.
Jay, right now, credit card debt has reached over $1 trillion. And as chief economist at Wells Fargo, I mean, the 3 largest banks that work with credit cards, Wells Fargo and Citi and also JP Morgan. Have you noticed, any either defaults or maybe slowing of payments from card holders? Or should we even be concerned that now credit card debt is over $1 trillion?
What I would say is whenever things always grow over time. Right. And so just because we've gotten to $1 trillion, what you have to do is you have to put that into perspective with something else. And there's a broad measure, which is called the household financial obligations ratio. All right. That's a big word. Or, what does that all mean? So it's any payment that a household is obligated to make on a monthly basis. So, example would be a mortgage payment. If you don't own a home, but you rent, your lease payment would show up there, minimum payment on a credit card, auto loan, student loan, the whole 9 yards. Okay. So if you look at that, all those obligations as a percent of income, it's about 10% today. All right. So how does that compare to history? If you go back and you look at right before the financial crisis, that was at 15% today. So the point here is, yes, household debt has gone up over time, but the economy's grown as well. The ability for people to pay off their debt is higher today than what it was before. Now, are we seeing delinquencies go up? I can't speak to Wells Fargo precisely because I don't have access to that data. I sit on the public side of the bank here. But when you look at just broad credit card data, you are seeing delinquencies go up now from a very low level. Okay. So when I look at the overall financial picture of the household sector today, in general, it's pretty good right now. I talked about that obligations ratio before, very low. If you look at household debt as a percent of income, measure of leverage, again, relatively low. But things are starting to deteriorate somewhat at the margin.
Jay, what about GDP, gross domestic product? I mean, right now, as for second quarter, we were at 2.4%. And I'm thinking about the national debt. I've been around long enough to know that thinking that the government is going to cut won't happen. So that means we have to keep growing the economy. And at 2.4%, okay, that would be good. Do you think that our GDP for the third quarter and the fourth quarter will continue as such, so that we would be able to keep pace with the national debt and with interest payments?
Everything we know about the third quarter so far leads us to believe that you're looking at another 2% or so sort of growth rate. Fourth quarter may be a little bit lower than that. I mean, what we do have is we do have interest rates that probably aren't going to go up anytime. We don't think are going to go up further from here, but they're probably not going to come down either. And so, if you look at, so in the short term, in terms of the debt, and again, you have to scale it by something. So we always look at the debt to GDP ratio. That very well may stabilize here in the short term. But when you look further out, most projections show that debt to GDP ratio is going to continue to rise, because we as a country are getting older. And people tap into Social Security, they tap into Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. And those programs, so if you look at the Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, those programs, the so-called entitlements, account for more than 50% of what we spend our money on as a country in terms of our federal spending. Those things probably aren't coming down anytime soon, right? And that's going to continue to grow. So we need to, again, I don't lay awake at night worrying about the deficit, or don't worry about the debt. Interest rates generally remain very low, but we need to start talking about how we're going to make a fiscal correction, or we could find ourselves 5, 10, 15 years from now having some real issues as the debt just starts to really go up as more and more people retire.
When you take out core CPI, and I'm thinking about, let's say, energy and food and such, and I'm curious on, with Christmas time coming up, holiday seasons are coming, people will be going out Christmas shopping, putting things on their credit cards and such. Do you think that a lot of retail stores are looking forward to the fourth quarter, because this is their time of what they don't get between the first to the third quarter? The fourth quarter is their time as a make or break. Do you think this coming holiday season of 2023 will be a good one?
I don't think it's going to be call it a banner year for holiday sales coming up. I don't think it's going to be awful. I mean, we're not talking 2008, right after the financial crisis, right? But I don't think it's going to necessarily be a banner year either. Household finances are getting a little bit more stretched. If gasoline prices continue to rise from here, that's another sort of headwind. You've got credit card debt. Delinquency is already starting to go up. Some people starting to feel a little bit stretched. And so I think it'll be an okay year in terms of holiday spending. But again, I just don't think it's going to be a banner year this year.
But also, the Teamsters just secured a huge contract with UPS. I know they're going after Amazon drivers as well. Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild are right now picketing to get higher wages. So the thing about labor is that once you start paying a higher wage, you can't take it back. Will these labor wage increases, will that slow the economy, or what will that do to inflation?
So, again, I'll go back to what I said before. If you look at the percent of the workforce that's unionized today, it's about 6% of the overall labor force. So, I mean, we're not talking the 1950s or the 1960s when a much higher percentage was unionized. And so, if it's only 6%, it's going to have just a very, very marginal effect on overall wages in the economy and overall inflation. That said, the labor market remains pretty tight right now. Now, we're not seeing the same sort of wage gains today as we saw, a year or two ago, coming right out of the pandemic. Wage growth is starting to moderate. But if you look at a widely followed measure of wage inflation, it's running a little bit north of 4% right now. And just to put that into perspective, if you go back, you look at the last expansion, 2010, 2019, at the last part of that expansion, 2017, 18, 19, it was around 3% or so. So it's high. And in order to bring inflation back down to 2%, you probably need a little bit more wage moderation. You probably need to get it back down to, rather than a 4 to 4.5% clip where it is now, it probably needs to come back to 3 to 3.5%. It's trying to slow the economy enough so that the demand for labor weakens a little bit. And that brings that wage moderation that I'm talking about. That's what all these interest rates are about.
Do you think for the next jobs report that'll be coming out for next month, which will be for September, we had an increase of unemployment for August higher than it was in July? Do you think what they're doing, that we're going to be seeing another unemployment rate higher?
So Andre, these numbers bounce around a lot on a monthly sort of basis. So if you look at July, it was 3.5. In August, it shot up to 3.8. That just sounds like a big increase to me. And so, if I was a betting man right now, I would say come early October, when this number for September prints, I would just guess it's going to tick down a little bit. But I think in general, though, as we look in the months ahead, in terms of trend, I just think that the trend of the unemployment rate is going to trend a little bit higher from here. But 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now, or say early next spring, could we be at 4% and a little bit higher on a sustained basis? I think the answer to that is yes. Just because, again, rates probably aren't going higher at this point, but they're probably not coming down either. I think we're going to be below 2% later this year and into early next year as well, if not even turning potentially modestly negative. So I just think the unemployment rate is going to trend a little bit higher from here.
What about bank failures, Jay? We've had some smaller bank failures of regional banks, and of course they're tightening up the credit, and most real estate loans are held by the smaller to regional banks. First off, do you think that there'll be more consolidation? And if they're holding up on letting out more loans, what do you think that will do with the economy?
Yeah, so if you look at what's going on with loan growth right now on a year-over-year basis, bank lending is up about 5%. And on a year-over-year basis, we came into the year being north of 10%. So there's been a slowdown in terms of bank lending. And then if you look at the last, let's call it quarter or so, if you look at that rate, it's even weaker than that. So there's not a lot of new bank loans that are going on right now. And if that were to remain weak, that's if you just don't have the credit growth going on there, then that certainly is a headwind on overall economic growth. People think about stocks, and clearly equity issuance is very, very important. But another big important thing that people don't think about a lot is the corporate bond market. A lot of even medium-sized players can issue in the corporate bond market, just go directly to the market and get credit. The corporate bond market remains very strong right now. So there is still credit that's flowing to the economy. Smaller sort of businesses, mom and pop retailers, people who have revenues of, maybe $1 million or something like that, they're contingent on, or very susceptible to bank lending.
Jay, government funding ends on October the 1st, and really just a couple of weeks away. And of course, there's talk right now of no CRs, continuing resolutions. Will it be continued? Now, we know eventually it will, but if the government stops funding for a period, do you think Wall Street has already braced itself for that?
For it to have a major impact on the stock market, it would have to have a major impact on the economy. And, we've seen this before. We've seen government shutdowns before, and it doesn't have obviously a lasting effect on the economy. Maybe it causes GDP in any given quarter to be weaker by a few tenths of a percentage point than it otherwise would be, but it doesn't have a major sort of effect. If the government shuts down at the end of the third quarter here, it's inconvenient for many folks, but I don't think it has a major effect on the economy. I think the bigger one was the potential debt ceiling debate that we had back in the spring. If the U.S. was going to potentially default on its debt, I mean, that's a completely different story. And clearly, the Congress made a deal with the president, and we don't have to worry about that for now. They're almost 2 years, so that's behind us. I just don't think a government shutdown has a big effect on either on the economy or on the stock market, unless it turns out to be a lot longer than what people currently expect.
Jay, we've only scratched the surface. I hope you come back.
Well, thanks for having me, Andre. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Jay. Hey, if you've got a question, maybe a comment about the show, we would love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it piffy, and write us at andre@benacapital.com. So let's take a look at the markets heading into next week. But before we do that, what do the letters of the NASDAQ stand for? We've got that answer, and it's coming up. Well, what do the letters of the NASDAQ stand for? It's the National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotations. Yeah, now I know why I call it the NASDAQ. Well, let's have a wrap up on Wall Street. If you're one of those that enjoy the airport lounge while waiting for your flight, Delta's changing the requirements to get into that Sky Club lounge. Next year, elite status will depend on dollars spent and not miles flown. And if you're flying economy, you won't even be allowed in Delta's their Sky Club lounges. Well, if you left Las Vegas with less money than you came in with, you're not alone. Cyber hackers stole customer data that Caesars Palace had to pay $15 million ransom to recover. And this week, they just hit the MGM Grand. Well, what is the state of the auto industry and the UAW going on strike? The government is pressuring automakers to transition completely to electric vehicles in 10 years while losing millions on EVs. Next week, we're going to be talking with Ronnie Lamarque. Now, Ronnie is the founder and president of Lamarque Motor Company, and Ronnie's been in the automobile business for over 50 years. And he's seen it all. We'll talk to him about his thoughts of the auto business, our dependency on battery components from China and other countries, and a lot more. You don't want to miss it. Ronnie Lamarque next week. Well, that's our show for Friday, September the 15th. Our thanks to Jay Bryson for being with us tonight. But as always, we appreciate you for allowing us into your homes this evening. Have a fun weekend with the ones you love. I'll see you next week. And remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap Up. I'm Andre Laborde. Always remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Wall Street Wrap Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.